June 6, 1944, the Allied invasion of Europe had begun. American, British, and Canadian forces landed along the beaches of northern France, determined to open a Western front against Nazi Germany. Among their many weapons, one would come to symbolize both the might and the limitations of modern warfare: the tank. For the Americans, it was the dependable M4 Sherman, mass-produced and versatile, a machine built for mobility and cooperation. For the Germans, it was the Panther and the Tiger, heavy, powerful, and feared across the continent. The confrontation between these two philosophies of design, mass and reliability against precision and power, would shape the outcome of Europe's final year of war. From the hedgerows of Normandy to the snow-covered forests of the Ardennes, and finally to the ruined streets of Berlin, the clash between American and German tanks would tell the story of a continent's liberation and the end of an empire built on conquest. Before the beaches of Normandy echoed with the sound of engines and shells, before the fields were scarred by treads and fire, the story of American and German tanks began years earlier, in the uncertain peace that followed the First World War. The Great War had shown the world what machines could do. In 1916, when the first tanks appeared on the battlefields of the Somme, they were strange, lumbering beasts, slow, unreliable, but terrifyingly new. In Germany, restricted by the Treaty of Versailles, open tank development was forbidden. Yet, in secret workshops, and through covert cooperation with the Soviet Union, German engineers continued to experiment. By the early 1930s, as Adolf Hitler rose to power, that secret work emerged into the light. Under General Heinz Guderian, Germany developed a revolutionary new way of using armor, not as scattered support for infantry, but as a fast, coordinated striking force. This was Blitzkrieg, lightning war. The tank was no longer just a weapon, it was a strategy. By the time Germany invaded Poland in 1939 and later France in 1940, its panzer divisions demonstrated speed and precision the world had never seen. The early German tanks, the Panzer IV and Panzer II, were lightly armed, but they operated with such coordination that they overwhelmed heavier but slower opponents. Communication, movement, and timing became Germany's great advantage. Across the Atlantic, the United States watched and learned slowly. When the war began, the U.S. Army's tank force was small and untested. But America possessed something Germany could not easily match: an industrial engine vast enough to produce not dozens, but thousands of tanks. By 1942, the American M4 Sherman was rolling off assembly lines in Detroit, Cleveland, and Chicago. It was not the heaviest tank, nor the most powerful, but it was reliable, easy to repair, and could be built in enormous numbers. Where one Tiger might dominate a field, a dozen Shermans could surround it. The Sherman carried a 75mm gun, later upgraded to $76, and a crew of 5. Commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver. Its armor was moderate, designed to protect against anti-tank shells at medium range, but it emphasized mobility over brute strength. The Americans believed in combined arms, tanks supported by infantry, artillery, and air power working together. Germany's design philosophy was different. As the war dragged on, German engineers pursued technical perfection. The Panther, introduced in 1943, carried a high-velocity 75mm gun capable of destroying a Sherman from over 2 kilometers away. Its sloped armor gave it protection far superior to its weight class. The Tiger IV, with its massive 88mm gun, became legendary, both feared and respected by Allied crews. Yet both machines were expensive, time-consuming to build, and prone to mechanical breakdowns. By 1944, Germany was struggling to replace its losses. Allied bombing campaigns had crippled factories and supply lines. Fuel was scarce. The Wehrmacht could produce only a fraction of what America sent across the Atlantic every month. Still, on the battlefield, when a Tiger or Panther appeared, it could change the course of an engagement. American crews nicknamed them Tigers, no matter the model, a reflection of both fear and respect. To face one was to test courage under fire. As June approached, Allied leaders prepared for the largest amphibious invasion in history. Operation Overlord would open a Western front, and with it, the final armored campaign of the war in Europe. From the sea, thousands of tanks were readied. Shermans modified with flotation screens, others fitted with flamethrowers or plows for clearing mines. Across the Channel, German panzer divisions waited inland, hidden behind the hedgerows of Normandy, conserving their strength. Among them, the elite Panzer Lehr Division, and formations equipped with panthers and tigers, prepared for the inevitable assault. The confrontation was not simply one of steel, but of doctrine and philosophy. The Americans believed in logistics, that wars are won by supply, organization, and adaptability. The Germans believed in tactics, that quality and firepower could overcome any odds. The summer of 1944 would test both beliefs in the fields of France, and from that crucible would emerge the final decisive contest of the European War, the armored struggle from D-Day to Berlin. As the night before the invasion settled over the Channel, waves rippled softly beneath the dark sky. Somewhere in the distance, engines murmured. Thousands of men waited in silence. And inside the steel hulls of their tanks, American crews checked their weapons, whispered quiet prayers, and waited for dawn. The morning of June 6, 1944 arrived beneath low clouds and mist over the English Channel. The sea was restless, but determined, carrying with it an armada unlike anything the world had ever seen. Among the waves of ships and landing craft, hundreds of armored vehicles waited to touch French soil once more. Inside their metal hulls sat men of the United States Army, tankers who had trained for months, who had imagined this day again and again, and now listened only to the rhythmic hum of their engines. On the beaches of Omaha and Utah, the first American tanks, modified amphibious Shermans known as DD tanks, approached the shore. Some made it safely through the choppy surf. Others sank beneath the waves before they could fire a single shot. Those that reached the sand rolled forward under heavy machine gun fire, their tracks biting into wet gravel. Smoke drifted low across the beach as engineers cleared obstacles and infantry pressed inland. The battle for Normandy had begun. The Hedgerow War. In the days that followed, American tanks moved off the beaches into the Norman countryside, a place of quiet lanes and ancient farms bordered by thick hedgerows of earth and brush. What seemed peaceful from above became a maze of death below. Each field was a fortress. German defenders, often from elite panzer divisions, used the terrain to ambush Allied vehicles. The narrow roads limited visibility. The walls hid anti-tank guns and infantry armed with Panzerfausts. Sherman crews learned quickly. They welded makeshift prongs, rhino tusks, to the fronts of their tanks, allowing them to burst through the hedges instead of climbing over them. Still, every advance was slow, deliberate, and costly. Across these quiet fields, the Panther tank proved its worth. Its long-barreled 75mm gun could destroy a Sherman before the American crew even saw it. Yet the Panther's weight made it clumsy in tight terrain. Its complex suspension often broke under stress. For every German tank that struck first, dozens of Allied machines waited behind, supported by artillery and air power. Through June and July, the fighting grew heavier around Saint-Lô and Caen. The air vibrated with the distant drone of bombers. Dust and smoke rose slowly into the humid summer air, mixing with the scent of fuel and earth. The front moved, at times, only a few hundred meters a day. Operation Cobra, the breakout. By late July, American commanders sought a way to break the stalemate. The plan was called Operation Cobra. It began with a thunderous air bombardment on July 25, 1944, when thousands of Allied aircraft struck German positions west of Saint-Lô. After the dust settled, the U.S. First Army advanced, columns of Shermans rolling through shattered villages and open gaps. Here, the tank war changed character. Once trapped by hedgerows, American armor now surged across open fields. German resistance, though fierce, began to crumble under the weight of constant attack. Fuel shortages plagued the panzers. Crews were forced to abandon their tanks when they could no longer move them. By early August, the Allies encircled large German forces in the Falaise pocket. The road to Paris opened, and with it, the road to the German border. For the first time, Allied crews began to believe that the end of the war might truly be in sight. Into the heart of France, through late summer, the columns rolled eastward. The countryside changed. Hedgerows gave way to broad plains and towns with church spires untouched by shell fire. The sound of tank engines echoed softly down cobblestone streets as liberated civilians watched from doorways. Children waved small flags. Women offered flowers and bread. For the soldiers inside the tanks, these brief moments of calm were precious, reminders of what they were fighting for. German armored units retreated toward the Seine, and then beyond, regrouping behind the heavily fortified Siegfried Line. The Panther, Tiger, and the new King Tiger, or Tiger II, awaited the Allies there. Heavier, thicker, and more formidable than ever, these tanks represented Germany's last attempt to stem the tide. The Battle of the Bulge by December 1944, winter had settled over Europe. Snow blanketed the Ardennes forests. Roads turned to ice beneath gray skies. It was here, in this quiet season, that the German army launched its final major offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. In the early hours of December 16th, the stillness was shattered by artillery. German panzers, including Tigers and Panthers, surged through the mist, aiming to split the Allied lines and seize the port of Antwerp. American units, surprised and outnumbered, fell back in confusion. Towns such as Bastogne, Saint-Vith, and Clairvaux became names etched into the memory of those cold weeks. In Bastogne, surrounded paratroopers of the 101st Airborne held firm, while armored columns tried desperately to reach them. The weather, bitter cold and constant snow, grounded Allied aircraft for days. German tanks advanced through frozen woods, their engines groaning, their crews exhausted. When the skies finally cleared on December 23rd, Allied bombers and fighter bombers struck back. Sherman units moved again, cutting through snowdrifts and burning wrecks. Fuel shortages crippled the German advance. The offensive faltered and died. By early January 1945, the Bulge had been erased. The German army had lost thousands of tanks and vehicles it could never replace. For American tankers, the cost was high, but the lesson was clear. Mobility, supply, and endurance had overcome even Germany's heaviest armor. Crossing the Rhine as winter melted into spring, the Allies stood on the banks of the Rhine River, the last great barrier before Germany's heartland. Bridges had been destroyed, but engineers worked tirelessly under enemy fire to throw new spans across the water. At Remagen on March 7th, American forces seized a bridge still intact. Sherman tanks rumbled across its trembling steel arches, one after another, under clouds of smoke. On the far bank, they fanned out through small villages, passing fields once green, but now churned to mud. German resistance grew desperate. Panthers and Tiger IIs lay hidden among the ruins, waiting for ambush. Yet their numbers were few, their crews often young and untested. For every German tank that appeared, the Allies could bring 5, supported by thunder from the sky. Fuel, always fuel, haunted the German side. Many tanks were destroyed not by enemy fire, but by their own crews, abandoned and burned to prevent capture. The road to Berlin by April 1945, the Allies moved east across a collapsing front. American, British, and Canadian forces swept through western Germany. The Soviets advanced from the east. In the middle lay what remained of the German army. Fragments of once mighty divisions, now retreating through shattered towns and forests stripped bare. American tank battalions crossed the Elbe River, meeting the Red Army near Torgau on April 25th. The war in Europe was nearly over. In Berlin, the last German tanks fought street by street, their guns echoing through a city reduced to rubble. The once proud Tigers that had dominated the steppes of Russia now stood motionless, out of fuel, surrounded by silence. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, the tank war that had begun in the dust of France ended in the ruins of its own making. The numbers told the story. Over 50,000 American Shermans built, thousands destroyed and replaced. Fewer than 2,000 Panthers and Tigers ever produced. Quantity had defeated quality, but both had changed forever the way wars would be fought. Quiet aftermath when the engines finally stopped, when the smoke cleared and the shells ceased to fall. The fields of Europe were left with the stillness of peace. Broken tanks lay rusting in meadows where cows would one day graze again. Children played among the hulks without understanding the terror they once inspired. For the crews who survived, memory itself became heavy armor, a shield against the echoes of battle that lingered in their minds. The Sherman, humble and enduring, rolled on into history, serving in armies around the world for decades to come. The Panther and Tiger, symbols of precision and pride, became relics of a lost empire. Together they told the story of a technological duel, and of the human determination that guided every turn of the turret, every mile of track. The tank war between America and Germany was more than a contest of machines. It was the meeting of two worlds, one powered by relentless industry and supply, the other driven by engineering genius and tactical ambition. In the end, the tide of history favored those who could endure. Not just those who could strike. As night falls over the fields of Normandy once more, one might still imagine the faint echo of engines across the hills, the slow, steady rhythm of steel against earth, and then, at last, silence. When the dust of war finally settled across Europe, the silence that followed invited questions. What, after all, had determined victory in this vast armored struggle? Was it the machines themselves, or the people and principles behind them? The American and German approaches to tank warfare revealed two distinct philosophies, two ways of thinking about war and industry, each reflecting the nations that built them. Germany sought mastery through precision. Each tank was conceived as an individual masterpiece, engineered with the care of a craftsman shaping a perfect instrument. The Panther and the Tiger were not simply machines. They were statements of technological pride. Every gear, every weld, every contour of armor represented the ambition to create something unmatched in strength and lethality. And yet, within that pursuit of perfection lay fragility. A machine built for excellence can rarely tolerate imperfection. The German tanks were heavy, complex, and demanding. They required meticulous maintenance, and vast quantities of fuel the Reich could no longer supply. Their tracks wore out quickly, their transmissions strained under weight, and their engines, though powerful, were easily damaged by dust or cold. When they worked, they were magnificent. But in war, reliability is often greater than brilliance. The Sherman, by contrast, embodied a different philosophy. It was not a masterpiece, but a system, a machine designed not to dazzle, but to endure. The United States, with its immense industrial power, understood that wars are not won by isolated victories, but by sustaining the fight day after day, month after month. The Sherman was easy to build, easy to repair, and easy to transport across oceans. Crews could be trained quickly. Spare parts arrived by the thousands. If one tank was destroyed, another rolled off a ship within days to take its place. To the men who fought in them, the Sherman could be both a comfort and a curse. They knew its armor was thin, its gun often weaker than that of its German opponents. They knew, too, that courage was often the difference between survival and death. But they also knew that their tanks would always arrive in numbers, that when they fell, others would follow. The Sherman was not invincible, but it was inexhaustible. This contrast between the German pursuit of quality and the American mastery of quantity became a defining theme of the late war. One Tiger could outgun 5 Shermans, but 5 Shermans could attack from 5 directions. And when the Tiger's fuel tank was empty, or its engine failed, the outcome was inevitable. Beyond the machines themselves, strategy and logistics decided much of what followed. American commanders like Omar Bradley and George S. Patton favored mobility, rapid, relentless movement designed to keep the enemy off balance. Their tank divisions operated as part of a larger web, with infantry, artillery, engineers, and air power woven together in constant coordination. It was not simply about tanks fighting tanks, but about overwhelming the battlefield through communication and support. German generals, by contrast, were often forced into defensive warfare by 1944. Hitler's insistence on holding ground, rather than retreating to fight another day, robbed his armored forces of the freedom they needed. Panzers, meant to strike fast and withdraw just as quickly, were instead pinned in place to defend towns already lost in all but name. And still, even as defeat loomed, the skill of German crews remained extraordinary. Historians often note the professionalism of panzer units, their discipline, and their courage under impossible odds. But in the end, no amount of bravery could overcome exhaustion, broken supply lines, and skies ruled by Allied aircraft. The tank war between the United States and Germany was not merely a battle of firepower. It was a test of systems, of societies under strain. It asked how a nation organizes its resources, how it trains its people, how it endures under pressure. The United States, shielded by oceans and fed by vast industry, could replace every loss. Germany, besieged on all sides, could not. By the time the Allies reached the Rhine, it was no longer a question of who had the better tank, but of who still had tanks left to fight. And yet, even as the war's outcome became certain, the image of the Tiger tank remained potent, a symbol of engineering brilliance, of defiance against impossible odds. Its reputation far exceeded its numbers, carried by the stories of those who faced it and survived. The Sherman, meanwhile, became the quiet victor. Its legacy was not carved in fear, but in persistence. A reminder that wars are often won by those who keep going, even when every step forward feels uncertain. In the soft quiet that followed the war, museums preserved these machines. Today they stand motionless behind ropes or beneath the open sky. Metal giants turned to memory. Children climb their hulls. Historians measure their armor, and those who remember still see the ghosts of crews within. Each tank tells its own story, of mud and oil and courage, of the long nights before battle, and the first rays of morning light glinting across the steel. The lessons they leave are not only about design or firepower. They are about endurance, cooperation, and the cost of obsession, about how, in the vast machinery of war, even perfection can fail, and simplicity can prevail. In the end, perhaps the truest measure of these machines lies not in their strength, but in their silence. For when the engines stopped and the crews went home, what remained were not weapons, but echoes. Echoes of innovation and fear, of ambition and loss, of a world that had once been torn apart by steel and then rebuilt piece by human hands. When the guns fell silent in 1945, Europe was no longer the same. Cities lay in ruin, Berlin a gray skeleton of what it had once been. Roads were broken, bridges gone, and in the fields where tanks once clashed, only rusted tracks and scorched earth remained. The war of machines had ended, but its consequences were only beginning. For Germany, defeat meant dismantling the very industry that had fueled its armored might. Factories that once produced the feared Panther and Tiger tanks were torn down, occupied or repurposed for peaceful work. Engineers who had once designed weapons now turned to rebuilding homes, bridges, and railways. Yet, the knowledge they carried, of metallurgy, engines, and precision mechanics, did not vanish. It spread quietly across the world, shaping the technologies of peace and the weapons of the future. The United States, by contrast, emerged from the war stronger than ever before. Its factories still roared with production. Its soldiers returned home to a country untouched by devastation. But the lessons of the tank war lingered. Lessons written in steel, sweat, and sacrifice. The M26 Pershing, which arrived too late to change the final months of the war, became a symbol of what came next. It represented the transition from the fast, lightly armored Sherman to a new generation of tanks, heavier, more sophisticated, and ready for a world divided by ideology rather than territory. As the Cold War dawned, a new rivalry replaced the old one. The United States and the Soviet Union began their silent contest, not over trenches and cities, but through technology, influence, and the machinery of deterrence. German tank designers, forbidden to continue their work at home, found themselves recruited by both sides. Some went east to help the Soviets refine their T-54 and T-55 designs, tanks that would dominate the battlefields of the 1950s and beyond. Others went west, lending their expertise to American and British projects, quietly influencing the development of tanks like the M48 Patton and Leopard 1. Thus, even in defeat, the spirit of German engineering continued to shape the balance of power. What had begun as the Panzerkampfwagen evolved into the global language of armored warfare. Meanwhile, the world itself changed its perception of tanks. Once seen as unstoppable juggernauts, they were now symbols of both awe and terror. Reminders of a war that had consumed entire nations. Documentaries, films, and museums turned these machines into stories of endurance and tragedy. The thunder of engines that once shook the earth now echoed softly in the halls of remembrance. In places like Normandy, Ardennes, and El Alamein, tank hulls still rest where they fell. Covered in moss, surrounded by silence, they have become part of the landscape. Monuments not of conquest, but of caution. Children climb their rusted turrets, unaware that beneath the quiet metal lies a story of human cost. And yet, the innovations born from that war did not fade. Tank technology inspired breakthroughs in engineering, communication, and mobility. The precision manufacturing methods used in wartime later fueled advances in automobiles, aviation, and even space exploration. The same engineers who once designed tank engines later worked on jet turbines and rocket systems. Out of destruction, humanity forged creation. The tank, once a weapon of fear, became a teacher. It taught that strength alone cannot win a war, that endurance, coordination, and adaptability matter far more. It showed how fragile perfection can be when faced with pressure, mud, and time. And it reminded future generations that even the mightiest machine depends on the people who build, maintain, and guide it. In the soft twilight of the 20th century, the tank's roar grew quieter. No longer symbols of empire, they became relics of an age defined by industrial ambition and human resilience. The soldiers who once fought within them grew old, and the machines they commanded turned to museum pieces, frozen in stories of valor, fear, and sacrifice. Today, when you stand before one of these metal giants, the air feels heavy with memory. Touch the cold armor, and it almost hums with the echoes of the past, the rhythm of engines that once decided the fate of nations. In the quiet, you can almost hear it, The slow turning of gears, the faint crackle of radios, the distant rumble of thunder over a forgotten battlefield. But now, the sound is gentle. It no longer threatens, it soothes, because time has transformed these machines from tools of war into whispers of history. Whispers that tell us not to forget, but also to rest, to remember with peace, not with fear. As night deepens, imagine the tanks resting too, under the stars, their engines forever still. The men who once commanded them are gone, but their courage, their mistakes, and their endurance remain part of who we are. The war of tanks between America and Germany was more than a contest of metal. It was a story of ambition, learning, and loss. A reminder that even in the darkest machinery of war, there is the glimmer of human will, and as the world drifts into silence, you too can rest now, knowing that history continues to watch over the peace their struggle made possible. The war is over now. The fields that once trembled beneath the weight of steel are still again. Grass grows through the broken tracks. Birds perch on the rusted barrels, singing where once there was thunder. In the stillness of early morning, the air smells not of smoke, but of rain and earth. History, too, has learned to breathe again. The clash between the American Sherman and the German Tiger, between the march of industry and the art of engineering, now rests within the quiet pages of memory. No longer enemies, only lessons. Lessons written not in victory or defeat, but in understanding. For the men who fought in those steel giants, war was not glory. It was survival, a test of endurance in a world where machines groaned like beasts and the sky was heavy with fear. Yet even in that darkness there was light, acts of courage, moments of mercy, a shared humanity that somehow survived the machinery of destruction. Tonight, as you listen, imagine those battlefields not as places of horror, but of peace. Imagine the tanks as they are now, silent, covered in moss, bathed in moonlight. Their metal frames no longer shine with oil and fire, but with dew. The war has ended for them, as it has for the world they once shaped. You can almost hear it. The soft hum of the earth reclaiming its own, the wind moving gently through open hatches, the distant call of an owl echoing through a forest that once burned. Time has turned the engines of war into monuments of memory, and memory itself has become a kind of healing, a bridge between what was and what remains. When historians speak of this age, they speak of strategy and industry. But when we remember it quietly, we remember the people, the ones who built, who fought, who endured. American engineers who believed in simplicity and reliability. German mechanics who chased perfection in steel and design. Two visions of power, meeting on the same roads, under the same uncertain sky. Each tank, whether Sherman or Panther, was more than a machine. It was a reflection of its nation's soul. The American tank, practical, collective, and determined. The German tank, precise, complex, and proud. And in their meeting, history itself found its balance, the victory of endurance over ambition. Now, only the echoes remain, and those echoes are gentle. They no longer roar. They whisper softly, through time, through memory, through stories like this one. As you rest, let that whisper guide you, through the quiet roads of Normandy, across the rivers of France, and finally into the sleeping ruins of Berlin, where peace, fragile but real, began to grow again. Let the hum of history become a lullaby. Let the world's long struggle find its rest within you, because every war, no matter how vast, eventually leads to silence. And in that silence, there is always something sacred. The story of American and German tanks, from D-Day to Berlin, is not only a chronicle of machines and battles, it is the story of how humanity learned to endure, to rebuild, and to dream again. So tonight, as the last words fade, as the sound of engines drifts into memory, you may close your eyes knowing that history has, at last, fallen asleep. Good night, and may peace in all its quiet forms watch over